is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Grace of Kings, chapters 43 and 44, in which, Kuni is making some moves, and Mata, perhaps you could learn something from the old saying, if you meet an asshole in the morning, you met an asshole. If you meet assholes all day long, then you're the asshole. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many, many thanks to Kyle for commissioning this episode. It has been a minute, and I was a little bit like, maybe I should go back and refresh myself, and I did, and I was like, oh, I remember all this. Like, I haven't forgotten a thing. This is very exciting, this whole section, because it is showing the payoff of a lot of hard work, really careful planning, and also we are finding out about some hard work and careful planning that we didn't even know about after the fact, which is a real fun, so we get to see some of the plans and the way that they turn out. And then we get to see the way that they turn out and afterwards find out what those plans were. And I enjoy that because there's part of it being the satisfaction of hard work paying off and part of it being the excitement of a surprise and the new tactics and new technologies that they have come up with. Now, I am really curious because I know that I believe it's been Kyle who has said that a lot of this story is taken from actual history. And I'm very curious about these underwater Krubans and if that is a thing that was taken from history, because the description of how they work feels reasonable, but also I don't know anything about anything. So it could easily be a fantastical idea that would never actually work out. And I really wouldn't know. So just curious about that. So chapter 43. For more than a year now, the reports from the airship's surveillance flyovers of Dasu remained much the same. Jin Mazati went on holding her strange war games instead of drilling the soldiers, and Kogo went on building new fisheries, roads, bridges, and other meaningless things that had no military use. Oh, really? Don't they, though? As far as Kindomurana could tell, Kunigaru was content to remain on Dasu, more like a gardener cultivating his plot than an ambitious warlord plotting military adventures. So right there, I have said all throughout this that as much as it bums me out that Kindomurana is on the enemy's side, he is an intelligent man who has a real aptitude for looking at things objectively, and that is often necessary to discovering new ways and methods of doing things, because we can tend to look at things with the same biases that we were brought up with, and it blocks us from discovering new methods or having imagination around those methods. And it's funny that that's what can happen when arguably somebody like Kindomurana has no imagination. But there is a certain amount of imagination that is accidental, that simply comes from being able to think outside of the ruts in the ground that everybody has been following. And it seems a simple thing, but it's something that I have come to realize about myself as I get older. How many things that I used to do artistically as a kid that I wouldn't even think of now, because I'm so ingrained with approaching things a certain way that it doesn't even occur to me to do them the way that I did when I was younger. And that's a shame. I've come a long way in some ways, and I know more and I'm more apt for, but there's certainly a loss there of simply coming at something open-minded in the truest sense. And Kendo can be that way in a lot of ways because of how objective he manages to be. However, it isn't always the case. Like, he isn't very objective when it comes to the roles of men and women, for example. So, he underestimates what women are capable of militarily. He is looking at the military usefulness of fisheries, roads, bridges, and thinking to himself that they couldn't possibly serve a military use. Because all he's picturing in terms of military use is like something that would assist in being aggressive, an army, something that can come at people. But he doesn't seem to stop and think about the fact that, like, you build an infrastructure in your country because there are people who need it. And oftentimes a spike in infrastructure comes from a spike in population. And the fact that this is something Kuni is investing a lot in should give him more pause than it does. He doesn't appear to be concerned at all. And frankly, that's a bummer. If, like, more fisheries as well to feed more people, maybe feed an army. And there's also the idea that, like, Kuni is trying to seduce people to come over to his, like, island in the middle of fucking nowhere. And a way to do that is to show that this place is just as advanced and comfortable to live as anywhere else. So it's really, there are times when Kindo is great with having a sort of vision and foresight. And this is really not one of those times. And that is both because he is blinkered by his expectations of what being an aggressor looks like. And he is blinkered. And actually, I was about to say, but this ties, it's the exact same thing, what an aggressor looks like, both in what kind of actions they take and literally who they are and what they look like. Because Kuni does not seem like a threat to Kindo. He is really good at play acting and being disarming. And Kindo has fallen for that. So, recently, his spies reported that Mazati seemed to be up to something. On the southern coast of Dasu, right across the Dasu Channel from Rui, 200 men were seen building ships. Their progress was slow, as they were short-handed, and among them there was no skilled shipwright. Marana intensified surveillance flights over the site. Mazati seemed to be pushing her workers hard, and the airships reported witnessing workers being whipped. As soon as I heard this, I was like, okay, this isn't real. Like, I know Kuni is not going to approve of a shipbuilding enterprise that involves whipping workers who aren't going fast enough. Like, that's just not going to happen. And when some dude defects and starts telling him information, I'm like, this has to be a complete setup. Like, get out of here. So, and the way that Marana reacts, guys, I gotta read this to you. Oh, Lord of mercy. She said that if her orders were not carried out, I would be executed on the last day of her 3-month schedule. I had no choice but to desert. Marana shook his head, just like a woman, full of wishful thinking and no understanding of the scale of things. Did she think that building a heavy transport ship was like raising a barn? 200 men in 3 months would not even finish 2 transport ships, let alone 20. Kuni Garu was a fool to trust his army to this woman, and it appeared that she was capable only of venting her rage on hapless soldiers, not planning logically. This bitch is so emotional, you guys. She just probably whipped him when she was on her period. You know what I'm saying? Like, these bitches, dude, they just don't know how to handle shit and think logically. You gotta be logical, guys. Emotion doesn't pay. Oh, this fucking guy. It's great. I love that this is brought up the way that it is. It's so good. It was midnight, and the people of the tiny village of Fada on the northern coast of Rui were asleep. A great explosion woke them. As they scrambled out of their houses, they saw a sight that seemed to come out of a myth. A great crater had opened in the ground, and out of the hole, men in full armor emerged, their swords drawn. Yo, that's a lot. That is a lot. So these motherfuckers tunneled underneath the ocean into the next island. Y'all, that's so much work. That is so much work. And granted, we get a description of how they did this, and there's like some chemical elements that they used in doing the mining that made it move a lot faster. Nevertheless, that is such a crazy amount of work. I just can't even fathom it, you know? So it turns out that this whole thing, all of the shipbuilding, is just a distraction to keep them from paying attention to the things that they are actually working on. There are tunnels that are half finished all over the place because Mapidere was trying to do something like this and failed. So they decided to like start off where he left things. Essentially, he started off the project, so may as well, you know, begin where it's been started off for them. And there was a grain storage depot that they built over the abandoned shaft to one of these tunnels. And this depot gives a perfect cover because they need to, it's very like The Great Escape. Those of you who have seen that movie, they have they're digging a tunnel out of this POW camp, and they have to hide the dirt somehow. And they sneak it out in these little pockets that they have inside the legs of their pants that have a string attached to hold them up. And the string goes all the way up into their pockets, in their, like the regular pockets. So they can reach into their pockets, let down the string, and the dirt comes out, and they can just sort of give their ankle a little shake, get the rest of it out, go back downstairs, and nobody in the yard is noticing these little bundles of dirt that are being dropped. They smooth them out with their feet. It doesn't look like anything. That's basically what they're doing here, is they are taking the dirt out of this grain depot in wagons that would normally be used for grain and carting it off somewhere and dumping it. And because the wagons arrive covered, it looks like they are bringing something to the depot, but they are actually leaving with something. And if they had been paying more attention, they may have seen that when they left, they were heavier. But nobody's paying attention to that because everybody's focused on these ships. So this description of splitting stone is so wild. Water mixed with certain salts, extracted from herbs, gathered and prepared by the inventor, could be poured onto stone surfaces where the paste would seep into the cracks, large and small. After the rock had been stewed in this brine for a while, a second, different solution of salts would then be poured over the rock. Where the two mixtures came into contact, crystals formed. Like ice in winter, millions of tiny crystals growing in the cracks exerted a force that pried granite and schist apart and made solid walls of rock as soft as cheese. The second invention that Luenzia selected was a way to pump air with a hand-cranked bellows into a sealed tank of water until the water under great pressure shot out of a hose. This pressurized stream of water could be focused to strike at any surface with great force. When this water was brought to bear on the rocks softened with the mixture of salts, the rocks crumbled like wet sand. So, that is how they are able to tunnel as quickly as they are. Best of all, it required no use of firework powder and so was safe and undetectable by surveying airships. So, this is what they do the whole time. And it's weird because, you know, Kuni is starting to take advantage of some of the things that Mapidere left in his wake, and it's really interesting after Kuni has sort of come around to realizing that maybe Mapidere wasn't as evil as he thought. He's like, the way he decided to carry things out was evil. He went too far. But overall, his idea of uniting all of the islands was really smart, and I understand the desire to simply end these pointless wars. So it's like he's opening his mind to the possibility of pursuing some things that this emperor left behind that would be totally distasteful and unthinkable to somebody like Mata, who anything that emperor touched is obviously corrupted and vile and must not be pursued at all. And he's not going to turn down perfectly good ideas simply because of who came up with them. And that's wise. That's some wisdom. Kyle says, it's like in D-Day where they used inflatable tanks to fool the Nazis. Ooh, that's true. That's fun. I forgot about that. What weird creatures we are. The shipyard was only a decoy, Kindo Marana thought. I was fooled by a simple trick. He had always been a careful man, but he was too focused on what could be seen and measured, what could be marked down in the notebooks of scouts flying over Dasu. He had been caught by what lay beneath the numbers, hidden by the appearance of superficiality under the ocean waves. It felt like an unworthy loss, as though someone had taken advantage of a loophole in the tax code. I adore that comparison. I adore that comparison because it's obviously one that he would make. But I also love an unworthy loss. I have really, that rang true for me. I have really been through a couple of things where I have just been like, I can't believe that I got beaten with this idea that never even entered my mind. It's like, if I had been able to prepare for this idea and come up against it with some sort of resistance, and they beat me anyway, that's one thing. But the fact that I never saw any of this coming and was so completely unprepared feels like it's not fair. And that's not true. It's not necessarily actually unfair. It's just that you suffered a failure of imagination. That's all. So I fucking sympathize with Kindo a lot. And he turns to Lewin and is like, I guess she fooled us both. And Lewin's like, did she? And Marana's like, oh, fuck. And then Lewin cuts his head off. Bye, Kindo. We hardly knew ye. To be fair, Kindo has lasted so much longer than I ever thought he would. I didn't think he would make it this far. And the fact that he is still alive is shocking. But having this is the kind of thing where it's like, I'm not sure it rings totally true that he would still be alive. But on the other hand, I like that he is, because I consider him a really worthy adversary. And the fact that Kuni was able to get the better of him means that he'd be able to get the better of a lot of people. Because this guy is unusually clever and pays attention. So, although this particular kind of victory, no doubt is going to have an effect of everybody sort of paying more attention to details than they have before. Because they're going to realize how good Kuni is at distraction. And they're going to start to be of a more suspicious mind. It's like after you watch one... oh God, M. Night Shyamalan movie, and every movie you watch of his after that, you're like, where's the twist? Where is it? Where's the twist? I bet that guy is actually dead. No, I bet that guy is, I bet he's alive, but it's the future. I bet he's his own father's mother. All of that kind of thing. So Kuni's going to have to keep an eye out for that. He leapt from the wall, holding aloft the head by its hair. The Dasu soldiers below had been prepared and caught Lewin safely with a taut cloth stretched out on poles. Mayhem and confusion reigned on the walls of Krifi, and commanders still recovering from the shock of King Kindo's death debated whether to immediately surrender or try to negotiate for better terms. Yeah, so that's pretty intense. And it turns out that this is DeFiro, and that he let himself be whipped for the sake of this thing, which is like, whew. That is dedication. Bearing that kind of whipping, I don't know, man. I don't know if I could do that. That is a lot. News of the conquest of Rui by Dasu ripped through the islands of Dara like a tsunami. Mazati was only the second opponent to ever triumph over the great Kindo Marana. The other Tiro states, already craving war, began to fight, intuiting that the hegemon would be distracted by the Dasu victory and not pay attention while they fought over more territories. Zindu immediately ordered King Kasugi of Han and King Thika of North Gefika to Gefika to increase their vigilance and send out their navies to aid the remnants of Marana's navy in a blockade of Dasu and Ryu. He did not bother sending out a messenger to demand an explanation from Guru. What was there to explain? Guru, the man he once thought of as a brother, had rebelled against the hegemon. It was proof of his original treachery at Pan. He was a betrayer through and through. This motherfucker, I swear to God. Y'all, I get so frustrated. This fucking idiot. Oh, Mata, you suck. And then this ends with, he would go to visit Kuni's family. What a piece of shit. And I am so happy at the way that this all turns out. Before we get to how that goes, let's visit with Mira for a second. Mira is the sister of the soldier that Mata ran into in the street, who reminded him of home and who cooked like all of the foods that he was familiar with, and whom he has somehow become like infatuated with. And it's a really interesting thing to do as a writer. I think having Mata like surrounded by all these trappings of greatness and power and everything that he has always said that he wanted. And yet this woman who represents the most modest lifestyle and represents a period in his life where he was being cared for by somebody who loved and cared about him, where he was being trained and given and believed in. This woman is what he is reaching for. And I feel like it's a betrayal of his heart. Like, it's showing us that he, more than anything else, wishes that he could be in power while still living the way that he used to. And he can't. But he's trying to have both. And you've got to pick something. You know, there comes a point. And I don't know. It just makes me think, like, Rashawn and I recently did an episode of Unsober about dream houses. And we were, you know, talking about, in our wildest dreams, where would we like to live? What kind of house would we like to have, or houses would we want, like butlers and servants and all that kind of thing? And somebody in the chat asked us if we would really do, if we had the money, any of the things that we were saying, like really, and when it came down to it. And both Rashawn and I said that we felt like there is no possible way to be a good and ethical person and still be a billionaire, which is what you'd have to be for us to fulfill some of the goals that we were talking about, in a rather tongue-in-cheek sort of way. But there comes a point where other people are hurt or hurting in a way that could be easily sidestepped with the right amount of money. And if you are spending that money on a fourth vacation home, instead of helping out people who can't afford their chemotherapy treatments, or fucking, there's a million things. Like, my brain just went blank because there's so many possibilities. I simply don't think that you can maintain your hold on that kind of money and be a good person at the same time. You have to actually consciously put out of your mind that there are people in the world suffering for want of what you have. And you have to make yourself not think about it. And if you're making yourself not think about it in order to continue to live exactly how you want when you have more than enough to spare, that makes you a bad person. That's kind of it. It's really simple. And I feel like Mata is in that position, but with power. He has so much power and could improve so many things for so many people. And he wants this, like, this simple, nostalgic life to come back to him. Dude, that life existed because you didn't have what you have now. And there that life that you crave, that simplicity, is all that many people you have killed wanted. They wanted to just live their lives. They just wanted to continue to raise their children, learn to do the things that would make their parents proud and happy. And you slaughtered them and drowned them and burned their homes to the ground and allowed your soldiers to come in and rape and pillage. No, you don't deserve to go back to what you used to have. You are a tyrant and a murderer and a monster. And the fact that everybody is telling you that and you still can't hear it, it just is so lacking in self-awareness, so selfish, so selfish isn't even the word. He is like a child. He's like a toddler, or like a 9-year-old. Like we talk about all the time in pop culture. When we have stories set in high school, we talk about like the cliques and the shitty attitudes. Let's all be honest. Middle school kids are much worse that way than high school kids. I don't doubt high school kids can be brutal a lot of the time, but I have yet to speak to a single person who had not had a much worse time in middle school than they did in high school. He is like one of those kids that has no real understanding yet of the consequences of what he does and is just learning at the way that he can like demean and oppress people and is running around doing it completely at random. And I say that sincerely. We saw the way that he divided up these states and assigned different people to be caretakers or kings or whatever, seemingly at random. It was arbitrary. He just felt like this day that he was like more interested in seeing what this guy did with it. And this day, that guy made him mad and made him feel like he was petty. So he decided not to give him anything. Like, he's a fucking imbecile. And the fact that he is so unwilling to hear anything from anybody is so alarming. I mean, he is as close to Trump mentally as I think we're going to come in this story, except for the fact that he actually has like the physical prowess to take down anybody who would try and challenge him. It's weird because Trump manages to weather every accusation. So in some ways, he's weirdly just as resilient. It's simply an accident of his privilege and money and being above the law because of those things. But yeah, so he is, it really is watching the way that he rewards people who did not really do much and punishes people who tried to be by his side. It's and you can read from the way it's written why he interprets things the way that he does. He really thinks this person tried to betray me, or this person is safe to elevate because they don't have the kind of ambitions that that person clearly does. But the thing is that when he assesses why people do the things that they do, he's seeing it only through the lens of why he would do something the way that they did it. And because of that, their intentions are completely lost on him. And all he sees is this black and white. This would be good. This would be bad. They chose this course of action. And I read that in my simplistic understanding as being bad. Therefore, I'm taking their whole kingdom away. Because Mata has no subtlety to him at all. So it's just... So, Mira. Mira is really having a hard time. She hasn't even slept with Mata, but everybody assumes that she has. And he is obviously like obsessed with her. He's doing things like she literally mentions that she misses home, her old house. And he has his men go and 100% literally pick up her house and move it to the palace, the little hut. The exact same built, like everything is in it, all the furniture, everything. She mentions at one point that she loves the way the birds sing, and he goes and gets 1 million like bird cages filled with birds and piles them into a room so that it's filled with bird song. Mata is so fucking clueless, guys. He's like a boy that likes a girl in high school and starts to like really border on creepy with the attention that he pays to her, but he does not have any perspective or understanding of how alarming his behavior is. There is a thread on Reddit called "When Did You Realize You Were a Creep?" And it's a bunch of people who are confessing things that they did when they were dating or when they were interested in somebody that they look back now and they're like, oh, Jesus, that was not a good choice on my part. But at the time, they thought it was romantic. They thought it was thoughtful. They had no idea how it was being interpreted by the other person because they didn't have that perspective, or maybe didn't have that kind of empathy or understanding of how differently a woman is going to interpret something than a man would. And a lot of them had stories like this, of coming on way too strong, of doing things that are way too over the top and pushing too much. And she doesn't know what to do with this weird attention that she's getting because, one, everybody is giving it to her like she's his lover. And like I said, she hasn't slept with him. Everyone is acting as if she's going to be queen someday when she's just kind of like, I don't think I want that. And she's also wondering, like, my brother is dead because of this man's ambition, and he didn't even know who my brother was. What would my brother say to see me in this position now with him, the man who essentially got him killed? And she can't rectify what happened to her brother, but she wants to honor his memory somehow. And she really feels like being in this relationship is super disrespectful, but she doesn't know what else to do. Like, she can't just leave. She doesn't really have the resources, despite her trappings of having luxury. Those aren't hers. They are being given to her because of who she is to him. If she tried to leave, she wouldn't take anything with her. It would be taken from her the instant she was abandoning him, and doubtless he would assume that she was also a traitor and kill her. This bitch is not going anywhere. Like, she doesn't have that kind of freedom. I don't know how this would work, you know? And the ladies in waiting are all like treating her like it's a foregone conclusion that she's going to be getting married to this guy. And she is so kind of like low-key disgusted at the way that they're talking about her. I have not been plotting or scheming, as you seem to think. There is simply no fire where you imagine smoke. You should seize an opportunity that all the women of Kukru pray for. The hegemon is in love. Everyone can see that. But am I? She had left the palace in a foul mood. Everyone seemed to want to tell her what she should be doing. She tried to clear her mind by walking about the streets. Sometimes she thought she saw him as her brother must have seen him, a man elevated above others by his own qualities, a Diran among mere fish. Sometimes she thought she saw him as just a lonely man, peerless but also friendless. Sometimes she thought her heart ached for him, and if he asked her to join him, she thought she would. But then she would remember her brother's body wrapped in the shroud. She would remember that Mata had not even recognized her brother's name. She had dreams in which Mata was alive again. Sister, has General Zindu now made the world just and right? She tried to avoid having to answer, tried to hide from him the fact that the world was still at war, that Mata had not made the lives of men and women into Noah better, that Mata had not even known who he was. But of course, in the end, she had to tell him everything, and as his face fell into stony disappointment, she would wake up, her heart so weighed down with pain and sorrow that it was hard to breathe. So she's walking around, and she runs into a god in disguise. You can tell, because it's a beggar wearing a bright white cape, as we have seen before. And he's like, hey, here's a knife? Murder Mata. It's really something. This is so baldly put. What is it? It's called the Kruben's Thorn. Mata once almost died from it. I'm hoping you'll succeed where the first owner failed. Mira almost dropped the bundle. Get away from me. Mata is too skilled to be killed on the battlefield, said the beggar, and so he must die from a blade he does not expect. I ask you to consider this, not because of the thousands who have died needlessly in his wars, or the thousands more who will die if he is not stopped. I ask you to consider only your brother and whether the Mata you know is the Mata he thought he knew. How can I dishonor the memory of my brother by plotting against the man he died for? The beggar chuckled. Lady Mira, your answer gives me hope, for you have not denied me by recourse to any of the qualities of the hegemon, but by appealing to the memory of your brother. Your heart is not his, despite what others may think. I always thought your brother the braver man. He was afraid, yet he fought. He risked his life without the promise of certain glory and the arrogance of long-distinguished lineage. He thought he was fighting for a better world, not one in which a new tyrant simply replaced an old one. Think of your dreams. Oh, yes, I know of your dreams, even if you haven't told anyone. Think about what dishonors his memory more. That Mata dies, or that Mata sits comfortably on his throne, built on the bones of your brother and others like him. See him for who he really is, Mira. That's all I ask. And the beggar turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Mira alone with the bundle. Without unwrapping it, she could feel the rough handle and the sharp, thorn-like blade. Some want me to marry him. Others want me to kill him. They all think they can use me. My only worth to them is my proximity to him. But I don't even know who he is. How can I decide what I want? Girl, that is a question, you know? So, Mata is heading to Kuni's because I guess he's just going to kill Gia and Kuni's kids. How about that? This fuck. Turns out that this maid, who clearly seemed to come from a noble family but didn't want to talk about it, is his aunt, Soto Zindu. Burr, burr, burr. Surprise, bitches. Never saw that coming. No idea. I low-key had no idea, but this still was a shock. And this bitch is not here for his foolishness. She is telling him all about himself, and it is really amazing. She says, "You're consumed by a grieved pride. All your life, you've held to certain ideals about loyalty, honor, just desserts. When the world turned out not to be quite as black and white as you would like, you decided that the world must be remade. You are in your own way a lot like Emperor Mapidere. You are both men who, because one path is not smooth, declare that the entire garden must be paved over with flagstones." And he's like, what the fuck? He's like so excited that there's another relative of his that is still alive, but she just comes at him with everything she's got, and he is so not ready for it. He's like, "Don't you remember what happened to our family?" And she's like, "I fucking remember. You're the one who doesn't seem to remember it. Because they buried 20,000 men alive under your grandfather's command." You believed you had to drown 20,000 men of Zana, men who were not even born when that atrocity happened. He starts to say, "I had to appease an angry god," and she's like, "Don't give me that fucking bullshit. Don't try it with me." And ends it basically with, the more you continue this shit, the more it's gonna continue. Everybody's going to try and get revenge on you. Then your descendants will try and get revenge back on them, over and over, around and around. She explains that she locked herself in the house and was going to allow herself to be burned alive, and that the house collapsed around her, but she was under a space created by some falling beams, and simply went unconscious, but managed to survive. "I came to serve this family because of the compassion of its lord and lady. I wanted to see if the great lords can take another path. You once called Kuni your brother, yet now you would do violence to his wife and children. Ambition has made you mad. Stop this, Mata. No more. Kuni has killed just as I have, Mata Zindu said, his voice equal parts grief and rage. I've done what I could to restore order to the world and bring glory to the Zindu name. Kuni is a mouse who steals my table scraps. He's unworthy of your protection. Come back to the palace with me, aunt, and live in splendor again. But Soto shook her head. If you harm a woman and her children in vengeance, then no valor will ever cleanse you of that bloody stain. I'll not allow you to soil the Zindu name in such a manner. If you wish to harm them, you must kill me first. Soto gently closed the door in Mata Zindu's face. It would have been easy for Mata to smash the door open with his bare hands, but he stood in front of the door for a long while without moving. Yeah, how about this? I was hoping that this would somehow, bring him to his senses. It does not appear to have done so. We have a brief scene that I really enjoyed between Soto and Gia. And they're basically, each a little bit underestimating the other. Soto is a little bummed out because she had hoped that she could continue to just be like a servant. And everybody is treating her like she's royalty now, and she can't get away from it, and she kind of has to resign herself that, all right, well, I guess my job as a housekeeper is pretty much over. So did Mata reply to your request? Not yet. Right now he's preoccupied with the wars. But we can both guess the answer's going to be no. The smart thing to do is continue to keep me and the children as prisoners. True, though your plan was worth a try. And Gia says, I thought I might be able to connect with more of Kuni's old followers in Zudi if I was allowed to leave. And Soto says, the thing you have to keep in mind is that Mata, he follows things according to tradition. If you had said that one of your parents was ill and about to die, and that you wanted to leave in order to go mourn them in respect the way that you are traditionally supposed to do for parents, despite you being his prisoner, he probably would have respected that because he understands this. But trying to appeal to his compassion, not really going to happen. Tradition, that's the way to go. And finally, she kind of springs a little bit of a surprise on Soto and says, so you told Kuni who you were before you left, huh? And Soto is like, well, shit. I didn't think you were going to piece this together, but you did. And Gia says, Kuni is a gambler, but he's not reckless, and he would not endanger me or our children with an invasion of Rui unless he knew of a way to keep us safe. He must have known who you were before he went to war. Did you make some kind of bargain? Mata would not take kindly to women meddling in politics, but Kuni is far more flexible. And Soto's like, girl, you're right. That is exactly what the fuck happened. And you kept the secret from me because you weren't sure I could continue to act the part of the proper hostage. If I grew too confident or bold, he might have suspected I wasn't afraid of him and deprived Kuni of the cover of my being essentially at his mercy. So that's a pretty clever thing. I enjoy this. And Gia, it ends with her being like, why did you, come and serve us? And Soto's like, well, you just seemed like good, compassionate, decent people. And she's like, we could have just been acting. And Soto's like, I mean, you never really know. And you just sort of sometimes have to take it on faith. And if somebody's acting at being really decent and compassionate, how far apart is that from them just being that? Which is a question I think a lot of us ask ourselves in various ways throughout life. So chapter 44, the Krubin in the deep sea. This, I only have 15 minutes left to talk about this, but that's okay. This is mostly action-packed, so there won't be as much character stuff to discuss this time. By throwing out everything that added weight, armor, weapons, extra provisions and water, the mattresses in the sleeping quarters, Marshal Mazzati turned a few of the airships captured from Mount Kiji into sleek speedsters. True to the vision she and Risana had shared, Mazzati staffed them with all-women crews. Unmatched in speed and maneuverability, these airships evaded the hegemon's airships and flew all over the islands of Dara. Their heavy pursuers were slower and could not stay aloft for as long. As they flew over the cities, Dasu airships dropped leaflets denouncing Mata Zindu for his sins. The massacre at Dimu, the slaughter of prisoners at Wolf's Paw, the destruction of surrendered and peaceful Pan, the betrayal of the promise of just rewards for rebel leaders, the usurpation of the throne of Kukru, the murder of King Thufi. The self-righteous tone, lurid language, manipulative illustrations. These had troubled Kuni when Kogoyelu first presented them. The facts in these accusations may be true, but why do we have to tell them as if they're stories whispered in tea houses? Sire, Kogo said, this is the only way to get the common people to be interested. I know that, but it seems too much. We've done some things we are not proud of either. We may commit more sins in the future. If we denounce Mata like this, people will think us hypocrites. Hypocrisy troubles only the unrighteous, said Rinkoda. Kuni was unpersuaded, but he always listened to counsel. He nodded reluctantly. I don't really know what that means. Hypocrisy troubles only the unrighteous. I feel like that doesn't mean anything. I feel like it's just, well, the only people who are worried about are the people who are guilty. No. Mata isn't worried about it, and he's certainly a fucking hypocrite. Like, what are you talking about? I don't know that this is a great plan. I get what they're trying to do. And it's all factually true, but we'll see. We'll see. So we get some play-by-plays of some of the airships and the way that they go up against Dasu, the airships from Terulu Pairing, who has experience with these kinds of things. But he's dealing with older airships that are heavier, not as adaptable. Because the ones from Dasu, they know about how ice will weigh things down, and they're prepared. He had advised Jin to equip the crew with long-handled pikes that they now used to loosen the sheets of ice as they leaned out of the gondola. The Dasu ship rose unscathed, and for good measure dropped a full load of pamphlets on the capital of Kukru. So, they're hitting it. They're managing it. Meanwhile, we get some back and forth between the gods. Rappa, my other half, are you really going to work now against a son of Kukru? Kuni is also a son of Kukru, as was Thufi and countless others who have died. You've picked your favorite and I have mine. I never thought we'd see the day when sister works against sister among the gods. I'm sorry, Kana, but our hearts are as varied and tumultuous as those of the mortals. Mata Zindu read through the pamphlet and grew angrier with each line. Lies. All the words are lies. When he killed only cowards and traitors and enemies. He was always forgiving and generous to his real friends. Kunigaru the betrayer, despite his dirty tricks and dishonorable band of hooligans, preened and paraded like a saint before the ignorant masses. Meanwhile, even Mata's own aunt treated him as some tyrant. There was no justice in the world. So he's over here thinking he's all misunderstood. Nobody gets me. It couldn't possibly be that everybody gets you, except you. And he goes out into the courtyard and he sees Mira embroidering. And he thinks to himself, and we don't hear this in his head, but definitely thinks to himself, oh good, she will make me feel good about myself. She will understand and hear me. She is a remnant of my past that is a symbol for me of peace and happiness, and I am trying to grasp onto it. Meanwhile, she's doing this incredible embroidery of him fighting when he's was wearing the hang glider thing, which is such a cool story. It really bums me out how cool and wild Mata was at first compared to now. It's very good, he said, his anger momentarily forgotten. I've made several of these, she said, but none of them feels right. I can't seem to fully capture the idea of you. Mata Zindu sat down. He felt relaxed in her quiet presence, like a cool breeze in early autumn. She never talked to him about matters of state, never plotted to gain some advantage from him for one faction or another. When she expressed a longing for something, it was simple. A house, a flower she remembered seeing once, the song of birds in the morning. He wished he could be so easily satisfied as well. "What's it like," he asked idly, "to make pictures like that? It seems to require so much effort, one stitch after another, and it's so small." "I imagine it's not very different from what you do." "Comparing what I do to your idle feminine pursuits is like comparing the path of a Crubin in the sea to that of an ant beneath my boot." As he spoke, he put his boot down on an ant crawling nearby and crushed it into a smear. Mira glanced at the ant, then looked up at him. Something seemed to change and shift inside her. When she spoke again, her tone was different. "When you lead an army into the field, you make a picture. I use a needle, you wield a sword. I make stitches, you make bodies. I leave behind a figure on fabric. You leave behind a new arrangement of power in the world. In the end, you work on a larger canvas, but I do not think the satisfaction we get from our respective work is very different." Mata had no answer to this. Mira's words infuriated him, yet he could not say why. It would be easy to dismiss her as a woman unable to understand the grandeur of his vision, but he stubbornly tried to get her to see. He had always been able to make her happy, hadn't he? "It's silly to compare how you feel to what I feel. I change the lives of every person in these islands. You are confined to a woman's narrow circle, a few feet in front of you." "That's true," Mira said. "Yet in the eyes of the gods, you and I are not much different from that ant. But I do have the consolation that my enjoyment brings no death and suffering. When I die, no one will jump up and down in joy, and I remember all the names and faces that matter to me." This bitch just said that shit to him. And he stands up and, is about to try and hit her. And could easily kill her. No problem. But when she looks up at him, she is so not afraid of him that it just stops him short. And she says to him, "I want to understand you, Mata, but I do not think you understand yourself." And he walks away in a tiff. And Mata, please, dude, fucking listen to anybody. Oh, God, I hate him. God. So, everybody's still warring with each other. Mata is, barely paying attention at this point. Everybody's fighting their coups left and right. All of these generals are starting to, realize they have the loyalty of their armies and they can overthrow the kings, no problem. Kakru's ships circled around Rui and Dasu, boxing the islands in like a floating wall of wood. The few Dasu ships hid in the harbors, not daring to emerge into the open sea. Kuni made no move to build up a navy to challenge the hegemon. And airborne invasion was impractical, as airships simply did not have that kind of capacity. The lack of activity after the pamphlets led to whispers that perhaps Kuni's ambition was simply to have a larger prism with which to stretch his legs. Gradually, discipline on the Kakru ships grew lax. Sailors on the ships spent their endless patrols playing cards and fishing to add a bit more variety to their monotonous diet of stale biscuits. Sometimes, the sailors saw great pods of Krubins passing under the ships in the sea lanes between Rui and the Big Island. Guys, I will confess to you. When I read that sentence, I was like, those fucking Krubin have soldiers in them. I didn't have any reason to think that, and as soon as I thought it, I was like, that's not possible. What are you thinking, Natasha? But I definitely was like, oh, those things are secret vehicles. And I just didn't think it was possible, so I immediately dismissed it from my mind. And then, the very next paragraph. On a deserted stretch of Lutho Beach, in the dead of night, a pod of Krubins beached themselves. 1, 2, 3, 10 Krubins crashed through the waves and laid themselves on the sand where they would have to wait until high tide to swim free again. The sound of their landing was grinding and metallic, less like living flesh, more like the clanging of weapons tumbling across a stone floor. Suddenly the Krubins yawned and opened their maws wide. but the jaws kept on opening until the top half of each Kruben's head was pulled so far back that it rested upside down on the creature's back. From deep within the belly of the scaled whales, hundreds of men spilled out. The soldiers hiding within the mechanical Krubens wore the uniform of Dasu. They had been inside the underwater boats for days, and they greedily gulped the fresh, salty night air. Then, quickly, they melted into the shadows of the night to join their comrades, who had set up temporary barracks in caves along the shore. The empty vessels closed their mouths and waited for high tide, when they would dive beneath the waves and go back to Rui to pick up more passengers. Now, I really like, because it says the empty vessels closed their mouths. I assume they're not totally empty, that they're not automated. There's somebody in there working these things and piloting them back and forth. But yeah, if one noticed the flags they carried, one might have seen a small change. The whale charging the red field was covered by a layer of blue-black scales, and there was a great horn on its forehead. The ensign of Dasu was now a Kruben rising from a sea of blood. These things are banana pants, so it takes a lot of trial and error, yeah, you think, for them to get this right. And they need to work on like buoyancy and making sure that they are absolutely watertight, because the pressure of going that far underwater causes leaks when it seems like everything is watertight. Once you get under that pressure, things shift and move, and what seemed watertight a second ago turns out very much not to be. And they use buoyancy tanks under the bottom that they can use to rise or sink them by filling them with water or from air that they pump in with a bellows. And that, for me, was one of the coolest ideas. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. The inside of the ships had plenty of room for crews. The eyes, made of thick crystal, allowed the men inside to see out. Other, smaller portals were made all along the sides of the boats as well, to provide illumination for the dark and dim interior. So, this takes a long time for them to get right, and there has to be another way to fuel them. They use like a breathing tube when they surface to blow stale air out and suck good air in, which looks exactly like the way a Kruben's breathing function with a blowhole normally works anyway, so that works out really, really well. Propulsion, they think they can do by using the tail and swinging it, but it's so exhausting to do that it's totally unsustainable for the length of the journey that they're going to have to make. There's just no way. So what they do is they realize that there are underwater volcanoes all the way across this like channel. And I'm going to read this. The bottom of the ocean between Rui and the Big Island was studded with a range of underwater volcanoes whose peaks rose to near the surface of the sea. The rocks around these volcanic vents were heated so that they glowed red. Luan and Jin trained the crews of the mechanical Krubens to hover over these vents and to operate mechanical arms to scoop up these red-hot rocks into a special tank under the boats. The rocks caused the water in the tank to boil, and the steam was then drawn through a series of tubes to turn a train of pistons, gears, and cranks connected to the tail fin and the pectoral fins. Engineers inside the mechanical Kruben would scoop up enough heated rocks from one vent to power the ship to the next vent. In this way, rising to breathe and diving to pick up more hot rocks, the fleet of underwater boats swam through the ocean like a pod of real Krubens. As long as the Krubens stuck to paths marked by underwater volcanoes, they could travel for days. That is wild, and I love it. It's so cool. So finally, they're like under some ships, and all of these people from Han and Gefika are like, oh shit, look, Krubens are underneath us, cool. And then they start to see that the Krubens are like coming up to the surface really fast, and they're like, oh fuck. And sure enough, they come up and their horns just break right through the bottom of the ships. And they do this over and over and over and over until all of the ships are destroyed in a couple of hours. That is intense. Well, Jimpen fell without a single man having to die. King Kasugi saw the massed spears and arrows outside the city walls and surrendered. Marshal Mazzati allowed him to stay in the newly rebuilt palace as a guest of Dasu. So you've found a better master, Kasugi said when he saw Luan Zia, unable to keep the bitterness out of his voice. Luan bowed. I still serve the people of Han, he said. The Kruben flags of Dasu whipped in the wind. King Kuni had returned to the big island. This is exciting, guys. My Kindle says that I am 84% finished. Can't believe how much there's still left because it's a long book, so going by percentages is a little deceiving. But damn. So yeah, this is session 16 on Crowdcast for this book. Like usually I have like 10, maybe, 12 max. So this is... Oh, Kyle says 3 more. I just closed my Kindle. Kyle says, Mata actually has ironclad principles. It's just that they're so divorced from reality. Yeah, exactly. You don't expect motherfucking submarines in your fantasy novel, right? I'm just like, it makes me laugh so much that I saw that. I immediately was like, oh yeah, submarines. And then I was like, why do I think that? That's not possible. Surprise, bitch. Yes, it is. So yeah, thank you very much, Kyle, for getting me onto this new chapter. This was a lot of fun. It's just, this book is fun, man. I'm enjoying it so much. So I keep on trying to get people to read it. I still haven't talked to anybody else who's read it. But hopefully I can bully some people into it. So, I'm going to wrap this up. But again, thank you to Kyle. Thanks to everybody who has been listening and following along. I hope you've been enjoying the coverage. And hopefully I'll see you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.